Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Havelock, Head of Commercial Mid-Markets for the Royal Bank in Scotland. I'm particularly delighted to welcome you all here today. I just discovered that I was in that video, which I hadn't expected to see. I am not on a royalty check for that. We're particularly delighted today because this is the only occasion that all of the party leaders in Scotland will engage with the business community, and it really is a privilege for us to be involved. And as the nation's largest bank for business, we do really value every opportunity to give business a strong platform to engage with policymakers. And for almost 300 years, we've been serving and succeeding with customers and communities right across Scotland. And that commitment to partnership remains central to everything that we do. And actually, it's partnership that has brought us here today, and I want to recognise the power of that and how we have worked closely and constructively with many of the business representative organisations to bring a room like this together. And that collaboration reflects our belief that Scotland is at its strongest when industry and policymakers all work together, side by side, to focus on growth, investment and opportunity. So this year, on that note, through our Royal Bank Accelerator programme, we're supporting 5,000 Scottish entrepreneurs to start, scale and grow. And every week, more than 100 people in communities are able to make better financial decisions because of the work that we're doing in communities with our Financial Foundations workshops. And these programmes are just a couple of examples of where we reflect our belief in the importance in innovation, ambition, and also financial capability. We're also investing in the infrastructure that Scotland needs for the future, and through our UK-wide 200 billion infrastructure fund, we are financing what is required for climate and transition funding through to 2030, supporting not only the development of Scotland's green economy, but also the businesses that will be the future. And we also back key moments in the economic calendar as well, such as the Royal Highland Show, which is coming up and is well in planning already, Scottish Edge Awards, and also the Scottish Global Investment Summit, which happened at the end of last year. So this afternoon we're looking forward to a constructive discussion, a good debate that's realistic about the challenges that we face in Scotland as businesses face into a very complex global environment, but also one that is ambitious about the opportunities ahead, and so that we are confident in Scotland's inherent economic capabilities. And it is now my pleasure to introduce our host for this afternoon, award-winning journalist and LBC presenter, Gina Davidson.
Thank you very much. As you maybe have had my stopwatch on for that introduction. It's now 4:15. We've only got an hour left. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. We've got 6 people on this stage, so there's a lot that we need to get through quickly. I am not going to take up too much time, but I do need to thank, obviously, all of you for coming. I need to thank CBI Scotland, Scottish Chambers of Commerce, the Institute of Directors Scotland, the Federation of Small Businesses Scotland, and, of course, Prosper for organising this event, all in partnership with the Times and Sunday Times. And if you are joining this conversation online, or even if you want to use social media from the room, there is a hashtag you can use, hashtag BizHustings. That's B-I-Z Hustings, because biz written that way is apparently cool. Also thanks, of course, to our panel for coming here. As we were just hearing, the first time all leaders of the parties have been on stage together, 35 days to go. Until the election, we have First Minister John Swinney, Anna Sarwar, the Scottish Labour leader, Russell Finlay, the Scottish Conservative leader, Malcolm Offord, leader of Reform UK in Scotland, Alex Cole-Hamilton, leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, and I've put him last because he was the last to arrive, Ross Greer, leader of the Scottish Greens. It's been a while, I think, since we've had an all-male tranche of party political leaders in Scotland, but who knows, maybe that will change after the election. So this event, who knows? It couldn't be more timely. We have just come into awful April, as it's being dubbed. Cost of living is causing us all problems. We're in a very volatile world, cost rising, investment being held back, competitiveness, a growing concern, business rates, skilled workers, all of these things. But at the same time, of course, as we heard earlier, Scotland does have many economic strengths in its people, its energy, innovation, exports, and indeed the resilience of so many of you in this room today. So the central question today is pretty straightforward. Why aren't those strengths translating into stronger economic growth for Scotland? And can anyone here who might be in the next Scottish Government be able to do anything about that? And there is, of course, a chance for you to put your questions directly to the leaders here today. So each party leader is going to have a minute to open a kind of elevator pitch. There will also be an opening question to the panel, and then we'll go out to the audience. So remember to raise your hand and say who you are and who you represent, your business or your organisation, but try and keep it short. I know I've been going on for too long already. The party leaders, again, if they can keep their answers focused and to the point. I know you have difficulties with that. I'm in front of you all the time, so I may have to interrupt you on occasion because we've got a lot to get through. So we will start with the key question that everyone, I think, in this room probably does want answered, and you'll each have a minute to respond. And we're going to take this in order of the number of seats each party held at the last Parliament, starting with the First Minister, and then it's a more randomised selection when we get to the closing question. So, here we go, First Minister, John Swinney. The question is, why is your party best placed to grow Scotland's economy?
I think my party is best placed to grow the Scottish economy because we are focused at all times on ensuring Scotland is successful, and we demonstrate that by the way we take forward investment choices within the country, about how we take forward the international promotion of the country, how we take decisions about investing in skills and infrastructure in Scotland, but also about, certainly in my own personal style, and how my government has operated under my leadership by engaging closely with the business community. And I recognise while we've got fundamental strengths in Scotland and our economy is strong, that's recognised by international commentary, and that we've been successful in attracting more and more investment to Scotland, we've got to recognise we've got to speed up the way in which we take decisions about economic choices and economic opportunities in Scotland. So part of what I'm going to set out during this election campaign is a series of commitments of what my government, if re-elected, would do in 100 days. And the first part of that would be to bring forward changes to our planning and regulatory systems to make sure that Scotland does business quicker than it does just now.
Thank you very much. Mr. Finlay.
Thank you very much. Our party is the party of business. I was at a gathering of business leaders a few months back, and I asked the room to raise their hands if they thought the Scottish Parliament understood business, and not a single hand went up. It might not surprise you to hear, including for all that, John Swinney's hand stayed down as well. The same issues keep coming up. I've been leader of the party for just over a year, and we keep hearing about a broken planning system, rate system that is unfair, income tax that's harming jobs and investment, a skills gap, energy costs. It's the same issues, and so many of these can be fixed by the Scottish Parliament here in Scotland. And the track record of the Scottish Government after almost 20 years in power is failure, is one of complete failure. We will continue to put forward detailed policies in respect of each of these, and we will continue to be the voice of business. No matter what the result of that election, we will be a strong voice of business in the future Parliament.
Okay, thank you. Anna Sauer.
Thank you. For 27 years, we've had a Scottish Parliament that's felt like it's focused on social policy, and it feels like we've ignored economic policy. And the reality is we need a Scottish Parliament and a Scottish Government that is going to put the economy first and foremost. And I'm standing to be First Minister in this election because I'm someone that grew up in an entrepreneurial household. I was raised on the warehouse floor. I worked in our public services as a dentist. And for the last 5 years, I've had the honour of leading my political party. So I've seen it from all angles. And the reality is we have to change the role of First Minister, and we have to change the role of our government. We need a First Minister in this country who doesn't believe the job of government
is to legislate and regulate, but instead is to innovate, create, work in partnership, break down barriers, get things done, and be a deal maker.
Thank you.
We have to be clear about the sectors we want to grow, and today I hope to set out how we use the levers in Scotland to maximum economic effect.
Thank you very much. Ross.
It's probably not possible in 60 seconds to cover the Greens' philosophical approach to the concept of economic growth, so I'll leave that aside for a moment. If anybody wants our 40-part PowerPoint deck on that, you can email me about it. In terms of this election, though, we believe that the Scottish Government needs to be far more strategic in its approach to the economy. We have a national strategy for economic transformation that is not strategic or transformative because it's trying to be all things to all people. The Scottish Government cannot support every sector exhaustively, and it needs to be focused on the sectors that we believe Scotland can genuinely be a world leader in and where we can gain the most from. You would obviously expect us to say particularly renewable energy, but also areas like life sciences, film and television, and video games. We want to see a far greater share of Scotland's economy being owned by Scottish headquartered businesses. Not to say that we would drive out the multinationals, but it should be an economic objective of the government to grow the share of our economy that's actually owned from here in Scotland, so we harness the full benefits of that. And we would actually want to see Scottish Enterprise and the National Investment Bank take greater risks. It's really frustrating every time a business that they've given support to fails, that we have negative headlines about that and condemnation of it in Parliament. The reality is, if government's going to support the private sector, it needs to be willing to take risks to do so, particularly startups, and that's an area of real risk aversion for Scottish enterprise.
Thanks, Ross. Alex.
Well, thanks, Gina, and welcome everyone to the Lib Dem Republic of West Edinburgh. It's hard to remember a time when it was this difficult to do business in Scotland or to grow the Scottish economy. Of course, there are the macro drags of Brexit and global economic shocks like the war in Iran. But there's the unforced errors of both governments as well, whether that's the national insurance contribution increases or the business rates revaluation in the Scottish government. And if there are three words that sum up the drag on our economy in Scotland right now, then they are these: planning, skills and housing. It's far too difficult to invest in Scotland right now. It can take years to get green-lighted for an investment decision on a macro scale in Scotland when it takes weeks in Scandinavia. Once you have those projects green-lighted, we don't have the skills pipeline necessary to feed those industries of the future. And we should be reaching for things that we're good at, like fintech, biotech, even data centres and AI and defence. And then finally, we need to make sure there's somewhere for those guys to live, because a lot of these industries are not going to be situated in the central belt. They'll be in the remote and rural places which are near to the wind farms that are feeding their power demands, and they need housing. I'd also say that the 800,000 Scots currently on a waiting list are creating a drag on our economy, not because they want to, but because they can't work, because they're waiting for a medical intervention. And finally, the white elephant, the big elephant that's staring us in the room, is that a phrase? The elephant in the room that's Brexit. And we need to improve our relationship with Europe, making it easier to do business with our nearest neighbours, the biggest export market for the United Kingdom.
Okay.
Of course, Lib Dems will always stand up for that.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we'll get on to more international affairs later. Malcolm Alford.
Thank you, Gina. So Reform UK, we would say that we think that Scotland is underperforming. For the potential that we have, the creativity of the people, the great universities we have, the innovation we've made over the years, the technologies that we've got. And I think at the end of the day, I think part of that has been a matter of culture. Certainly within the last 10 years, the SNP government have actually used this phrase of created something called the welfare economy, which has got its merits, but I think we really need to focus on creating a wealth economy. That really is the heart of it. We have to grow the economy, and all the politicians say that. How do we actually do this? And the question is, what is the economy? The economy is not just some sort of magic thing up in the sky. It's just real people. It's you. It's 2.5 million people who work every day in Scottish society. And right now, you are overtaxed, overregulated, and you're told that you have the broadest shoulders, so you have to pay more. And the question is, are you getting better services back in return? And is it actually having some disincentives on you where you're actually being less productive than you should be? And so that's why the first thing we will do is cut tax to make the economy more productive, because we invest in you. We know you'll give it back in spades through increased revenue, which means increased taxes in the future.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll probably get into the detail of all of that shortly. We're going to start, we're having two themes to this event. The first one is domestic policy. The second, Scotland's potential on the world stage. So we're going to start with what it looks like to do business in Scotland today. Look at the conditions, those of you who were in the room earlier for the presentation will see how pessimistic people in the business world feel about the future at the moment, around as some of the things that were mentioned here: skills, planning, regulations, day-to-day realities about investment and so on. So businesses are facing rising costs, those skill shortages and slow planning systems. What is the one change that your government would prioritise in its first year to unlock investment and to unlock growth? I will come to you first, Anna Sarwar.
Planning. It takes far too long to get decisions, and therefore investment goes elsewhere. And the example I always use is take my home city of Glasgow, where the average planning application takes 57 weeks. The average planning application in the city of Manchester takes 13 weeks. If you're competing for the same money and the same investor, the money's not coming to Glasgow, it's going somewhere else. So we will create a national planning hub, which means we use central expertise, projects identified as drivers of economic growth by the Office of the First Minister will have a national planning capacity dropped in. There will still be local decision-making. We have a shortage of planners, so we will co-opt planners from the private sector too, and we will get things building in this country again. Of course, lots of other areas, but you asked for one, planning would unlock that investment.
Okay. Ross.
For us, it's planning as well. I was proud that when the Greens were in government, we worked with Hamza Yousaf on it, and he was then able to make the announcement that we would halve the consenting time for onshore wind in particular. But just following up on what Anas was saying, I don't see how we can possibly unblock the planning process until we sort out the root cause, which is the chronic underfunding of local government, because they make the vast majority of planning decisions. There are certain planning decisions that should be made centrally. Energy is a really obvious example of that, but we cannot have just a central hub for planning to solve all these issues. You cannot do that at scale. So the only way that we can unblock the planning system is fix how we fund our local councils. The fact that our councils are operating with their primary revenue-raising power being a council tax that's not been in date in my lifetime is ridiculous, and it harms us all, but it harms the whole variety of services councils provide that are essential to local businesses. So if you're asked for number one priority, for us the number one priority is to scrap and replace the council tax, because it's the only way to fix the local services that everyone, including the business community, rely on.
I was going to say planning, but I've decided not to copy the other two and go for skills. It's an absolute scandal that Scotland needs to import 300 welders to work in Babcock in Fife. And that's because the college sector in Scotland has been starved of cash by this government. It's because the apprenticeship levy that all your member firms pay in, the money doesn't come back out. We don't know exactly where all of it goes. And what we would do is ensure that we would work with employers, get the college sector funded, ensure that we're training people for the economy of today and of tomorrow. You get that right, and then you've got a fighting chance to get the economy on the front foot and thriving.
Malcolm?
So I alluded to it in my intro. We think Scotland is overtaxed. It's overcomplicated. We've now got 6 tax bands versus England having 3. If you look across the water in Ireland, they've got 2. And it's a lot of unintended consequences with these tax bands, because it's creating a whole series of cliff edges, which is stopping productivity. I'll give an example. We've got a situation now in the NHS where we know that nurses are being dragged up into higher tax bands, and they're managing their hours. The same with doctors are managing their hours, because it's not just paying the additional on the extra hours, it's actually the withdrawal of some other benefits. So marginal tax rates become very, very high. So we've got a situation where we've got a workflow plan that's not working. We've got theatres sometimes empty with people waiting to come in, and therefore we've got a productivity issue. So our plan would be to get the 6 back aligned back to 3. That will cost £1.2 billion. And then we're more ambitious than that, because we then say we can make Scotland best place to work in the UK, and we can cut each of the 3 bands by 1p below England. And that way we will put a sign up for business saying Scotland wants to be the most successful part of the UK. Come and live and work in Scotland. And that way we can increase the revenue which pays for the public services.
John Swinney?
The first thing I would do is build on the excellent progress we've made in the last 12 months on the attraction of investment into Scotland. The Global Investment Summit that my government encouraged and collaborated with Scottish Financial Enterprise and various other organisations, including the City of London, has been hugely successful in opening up new investment channels for Scotland, and that's what we've got to deliver on. We've got to make sure Scotland is an investment-ready country, and I've made it my business in the last 12 months to make sure that that issue was taken by the scruff of the neck. We're now attractive for mid-market rent private housing, which we weren't before. We are now attracting more investment in relation to renewable energy. I want to remove the obstacles to that, not least of which are the slow decision-making of the United Kingdom government that's just lost us £1.5 billion worth of investment in renewable energy in Scotland. So there'll be a relentless focus on the attraction of investment, would be at the heart of my government's programme, along with the commitment I gave in my introductory remarks about a planning and regulatory series of changes in the first 100 days of my government being re-elected.
I'm sure you'll probably want to come back on what Malcolm Alford was saying about tax, but Alex Clehampton.
So I said in my opening remarks that I felt that the three words were planning, skills and housing. Just a quick reflection on planning. I agree with a lot of what's been said. Ross is right about the chronic underfunding of local authorities. But there is low-hanging fruit to make planning work now. One of the things that developers and investors tell me that they're frustrated by is not being able to see the officials in council offices that they need to see on any given day. A large part of that is home working. We wouldn't end home working, but we would ask councils to build in keeping in touch days when you know that you could go to your council offices and meet all the planning officials you needed to on that one single day. That would free up a lot of time and energy for developers. The thing, though, I would focus on the first 100 days is skills, because we don't have the skills pipeline, largely because of the quiet death of further education that the SNP have presided over the last 19 years. It's because the Liberal Democrats, we reversed some of that decline in this year's budget with £70 million investment in skills development in our crucial further education colleges. But without doing it, you get, and I'll give you an example of what the impact of that looks like. ScotWind, right? We auctioned off in ScotWind the lion's share of our prime seabed for offshore wind farms. But none of the supply side of that will happen in Scotland. It all happened at once. There was no phasing at all. It was done as well at market pittance of a market cap of £100,000 per square kilometre. And because we didn't have the skills pipeline, we aren't going to have the lion's share of those jobs in Scotland. That can't be allowed to happen again. We need to gear up for the skills of the future. We need to understand where our sector strength is and build our skills economy accordingly.
Right, a lot there, I'm sure, for you all to get your teeth into. There are a couple of roving mics, I believe, and we're now throwing this part open to questions from you all. So who'd like to go first? Lady here.
Thank you. I'm Kirsty Tinsdale from Food and Drink Federation. Our members basically feed the nation, in a short statement. Our businesses have been impacted by increased costs in energy, packaging, national insurance and ingredients. With the war, this will even get even worse. Yesterday, we predicted that food and drink inflation could reach at least 9% by the end of this year. Our members are absorbing increased costs, but there's only so much they can take. What would you do to ensure our businesses can survive and also grow?
Do you want that to go to anyone in particular? To everyone, right. Who hasn't started? Ross, you can start with that one.
I think in the first instance, and I imagine we'll probably come to this in more detail later, the Greens' position is the non-domestic rate system needs completely overhauled. We are using a property tax system as a quasi-business tax, is the reason why it's colloquially known as business rates. So long-term, not going to pretend that that's something you could do in the first 100 days. Long-term, certainly, we do need an overhaul of the NDR system. I don't think it works nearly well enough for small businesses in particular. I think it needs rebalanced. I'm not going to pretend that we're going to advocate for wholesale tax cuts across the board, though, because you then end up having to cut the public services that people depend on. If you do that, it has an impact on the economy. On energy specifically, though, for us, the major priority is transitioning, particularly how we heat our buildings off of the gas network and onto electricity-based solutions, heat pumps as soon as possible, and making sure that businesses get the support that they need to do that. It's not just aimed at households. So when we had ministerial responsibility for that, we tried to make sure that the grants, the loans, etc., that were available were not just for households, that business properties could have that transition as well, because we know that energy costs for brick and mortar businesses in particular are one of the essentially crippling factors in the economy right now. Long term, the only way to get away from that is to move away from fossil fuel-based energy entirely. We have an abundance of renewable potential here in Scotland. We're doing exceptionally well when it comes to what we currently use electricity for. The major challenge is how we actually heat these buildings, moving that off the gas network and onto electricity to help businesses and households lower their bills.
First Minister.
At the heart, there's multiple issues that are driving increases in costs. Some of them are domestic, some of them are international. global factors which, in the post-Ukraine invasion, business costs and costs in general have spiked with the inflation increases that we've experienced. So some of them are the factors of, external factors that have that impact. I think the underlying factor for me is about energy and energy costs, which are providing such a significant impact on individuals and businesses. So the focus we've had as a government about ensuring much greater support for the expansion of renewable energy has provided a great deal more insulation for Scotland from the external shocks that we're experiencing. But we're not seeing the benefit of that because of the nature of how the United Kingdom's energy market is constructed. So Scotland is generating phenomenal amounts of renewable energy, but our businesses and our households are not benefiting from the lower costs that they should be benefiting from, and that would address directly the fundamental issue that you're raising with me. So I think wholesale reform of the energy market is vital. It's something we've argued for with the United Kingdom government, but the fact that there has been paralysis on this question since 2024 indicates the need for there to be a very strong voice from Scotland, making sure that our energy resources are under our control, able to respond to the challenges that you legitimately put to me about the cost of energy for business.
Malcolm Offord, do you want to see wholesale change when it comes to energy, but maybe not of the type that John Swinney's talking about?
Correct. I mean, I think that the short-term mitigations would be reversing these business rates and getting a fair system, and second of all, the income tax cut. But the longer term issue is you cannot grow an economy with expensive energy. It's just not possible. And our energy is now 7 times more expensive than China and 4 times more expensive than the US. And we've done this to ourselves. We account for less than 1% of global emissions. China accounts for 30%. The US accounts for 13%. Now, what they've done is they're doing their transition, but what they've used as their transition fuels, China is 30% renewables, 70% coal. We stopped burning coal in 97. Fine. At that time, the world burned 4 billion tonnes of coal. Today, it's burning 8 billion. They're opening 1 coal power station per week. So they are using that as their transition fuel. I'm not advocating we do that. America's using shale gas as their transition fuel. We do have a transition fuel, which is called North Sea gas. 70% of our gas we import from Norway, from fields in the North Sea, over the fence, from ones that we own that we're shutting down. Even the Norwegian energy minister says that is daft. And contrary to this narrative that says, oh, all that happens is it goes on to the international market, it does not need to. You can license North Sea oil and gas purely for domestic production, which is what America did. 20 years ago, the US was a net importer of energy. Today, it's a net exporter. They used the shale gas purely to get prices down initially. We could do the same with North Sea gas, get our prices down immediately, and then we can think about a transition. But it needs to be a transition which takes account of the fact that right now, only 1/3 of your bills are actually the cost of electricity. All the rest of it, subsidies, tariffs, carbon taxes, and we cannot grow an economy with expensive energy.
Are you a fan of fracking? Would that be
no,
one of
fracking's a
your
red
policies?
herring. No, fracking's a red herring.
Right.
Our geology does not work for fracking. It's one thing in the Texas desert. That's fine. That's what they had. That was their shale gas. That's fine. That's their transition fuel that they've used. And they've done it in transition. It's not substituting one or the other. But we need to use North Sea gas as our transition fuel. And it's right outside there on our doorstep.
You'd agree with that, Russell Finlay? That's where you've landed, isn't it?
I would agree that we need to maximise our own domestic energy supply, our own oil and gas. I was in Aberdeen on Monday with Kemi Badenoch talking to oil sector workers, and they've got in despair at the blockage on new developments by the Labour government in London and the SNP's opposition here, although John Swinney appears to have potentially changed his mind on this yesterday. But we need to maximise the energy that we have at our disposal, bring down the costs, invest in new nuclear, which is again an ideologically opposed by John Swinney's government, and get the country working again. And just touching upon the rates bills, the system's completely broken. As of yesterday, many businesses across Scotland had to start paying the new rates. In some cases, inexplicably, these had risen by 2, 3, 4, 500%. There's at least one business owner in this room tonight who's had to turn the key in the door, turn the lights off and give up. Not because he wasn't good at business, but because the rates bill was so prohibitive that he had no more room left to make any more savings. This was a guy that worked tirelessly, didn't take a wage out of the business for a long time, and kept going because he didn't want to cut people's jobs and leave them in the scrap heap. And that's the reality. So you can fix rates in a heartbeat. If the SNP government had been listening to businesses, not least hospitality businesses, they could have paused the rates bills and given them that respite, given them that breathing space. But also, let's maximise our own energy.
Anna Sarwar, your government is obviously responsible at UK level for energy policy. Is it just not going in the right direction?
So I think a few different things need to happen. First of all, there's recognising the conflict in Iran and the added cost pressures that is currently added and potentially could add. I think we have to look at every option around emergency support for businesses, particularly energy-intensive businesses. Secondly, there was a commitment made to honour oil and gas licences that were granted before the election. They should be honoured in full. Third, we will end the ideological block to clean nuclear energy in Scotland. 23% of Scotland's electricity comes from nuclear sources, but for some bizarre reason, Scotland wants the investment, the jobs to go elsewhere. I want the investment and jobs to come here to Scotland. So we will end that ideological block. We'll attract billions of investment. We'll create thousands of jobs, and we'll deliver greater energy security here at home. And we should abolish a broken business rate system. We should appoint a chief assessor because the assessments have been atrocious right across the country. But directly on the question of food and drink industry, only around 1 in 5 businesses currently export in Scotland. We have some great export markets. How do we tap into those connections and those networks for those that already do it really well as use the infrastructure we have across the UK, around the globe, to maximise the opportunities for other businesses too, as well as how we get more people to visit here, because we know a tourist spends more money in Scotland than someone within country or someone coming from another part of the UK. That's why we would introduce route development funds, for example, for our airports, so we can get more direct flights coming into Scotland, more tourism into Scotland, and more exports out of Scotland.
Alex?
Well, food and drink is the jewel in the crown of what we do well in Scotland, and is a success story. But you've had to weave gold out of straw, given all of the sort of breakbacks you're dealing with from both governments and the major shocks that you're experiencing at the moment. This is going to be a cost of living election. There's no question about it. All of your businesses rely on the money in the pockets of consumers who are feeling it tight right now, but that is as nothing as to when the energy price cap changes in July. Things are going to go from bad to worse. So energy is important. Energy security is important. Now, Lib Dems have always been very clear that we're not ideological about this, but we do recognise that the end-of-level boss, the final boss of the 21st century, is climate change. So everything that we do has to have a weather eye on that reality too. But it doesn't mean turning off the taps on North Sea oil and gas. That has to be part of the mix, because we still have a dependency on it. So in terms of drilling and extracting from those new fields, we weigh it up. Is it more environmentally sound to extract from our own backyard than it is to import? It may well be. On nuclear, we've been on a journey as well. The small modular reactor technology has persuaded Liberal Democrats that nuclear energy should be part of our energy mix, and renewables. We have to get that right, but that comes with upgrading the grid. We are paying constraint payments of nearly £2 billion a year from the public purse, my tax pounds, your tax pounds, going to energy companies not to put their power into our grid. That is insane that we're having this discussion, and that is a reality. We need to vastly accelerate our move to upgrade the grid. And the final thing I'll say is this, is on non-domestic rates. I agree, the assessments are criminal and they are putting people out of business. We all know examples of the exorbitant hikes that some businesses are facing without so much as a buy or leave. And I've asked repeatedly of the Scottish Government about these assessments, about these revaluations. They say the assessor is a creature of COSLA. You go to COSLA, they say it's a creature of the Scottish Government. And there's nobody entirely clear who's in charge here. We need urgently business rates reform. That's why the Liberal Democrats extracted £178 million from the SNP government in this most recent budget to extend relief to businesses on business rates. But when we talk about reform, we need to make sure that it's not just around some arbitrary assessment of your business's value. You should not be disincentivized to refurbish your premises in the understanding that when those revaluations come around again, that that's going to be penalised against the value of your business for the investment you put into it. That is not a means of stimulating growth in this country, and I can't believe we're still talking about this now.
I think there's 2 points I'd like to say in response to what Alec is talking about and which colleagues have talked about in the panel. The discussion around the business rates, I appreciate the challenges that business rates throw up for companies around the country, but there are very significant measures put in place in the government's budget to smooth any impact of those business rates increases, with over £900 million allocated to support the suppression of business rate costs for companies. Now, that's a huge investment. And the second point I want to make, and it relates a wee bit to what Malcolm talks about, because Malcolm talks about a £1.2 billion tax cut for the country, and Alec talks about we can save hundreds of millions of pounds on business rates, but nobody talks about the impact that would then have on the other demands on public services and the public finances and the issues that people depend upon in our society. So we've got to...
fairness, John, and transparency.
Well, absolutely. I'm all for fairness and transparency. But what I'm saying is that there's a discussion that's got to be had about what we raise revenue for and what it's got to be allocated for as
We're
part
not saying
of
not
this
to raise the
discussion.
revenue.
No, but
this is to be fair and transparent,
essentially,
and it is neither.
essentially, Alec, what you're saying is that there is a means that can withstand any impact of business rates on companies without there being a knock-on effect on public services, that you yourself demand that I increase public expenditure.
I think Russell wants to come in as well.
That's the only point I'm simply saying, that we've got to see it in the
Sorry
round. That's the point.
Interrupt, but is this the same John Swinney who has withheld £700 million of rate relief over the years, or is that a different John Swinney?
Well, the John Swinney that's sitting here has just put £900 million into the budget this year, which, by the way, you didn't vote for.
Of course not.
Actually, the only supporter I had for the budget was Alec Cole-Hamilton. He's now trying to have his cake and eat it afterwards. But that's
This is not for the First Minister's questions, chaps.
There's one core issue, though, which is, so I accept that there are rates relief in place, but given the scale of the increases because of the reassessments, the reliefs do not touch the sides on what has happened and impacted on businesses. So the right thing to do would have been to pause the reassessments, to reevaluate them, and then do a rates relief system that was fair, rather than continue on with the reassessments. People's bills got by 300, 400%, and then say, oh, but by the way, we'll put in a bit of a relief effort. It doesn't work and it doesn't make sense. And to be honest, the business out there know that the sums just really don't add up, John. And it's just not true to say that the reliefs meet the reassessments. They don't. And that's why businesses are going to wall across.
I'm surprised.
A question here, though. We spend £750 million on rate relief every year, and yet we're clearly still not getting the value out of it because it's not a remotely strategic system. So why do short-term lets get rate relief despite the chaos they're causing in the housing market, particularly in rural communities, but companies that are spin-outs of universities don't? I have encountered so many spin-out companies who, after 2-3 years, move to somewhere between Oxford and Cambridge. We lose, as soon as they become successful, we lose them in Scotland because we don't have a rate relief system that's designed to support them, and yet we've got relief going to all sorts of companies and business ventures out there that, frankly, are not in the strategic interest of the country.
Unsurprisingly, Stephen Montgomery's got his hand up on this, if you want to ask a question.
Stephen Montgomery, Scottish Hospitality Group. I don't know how you can answer that, because the person that Russell Finlay was talking about that closed his doors to his business yesterday was me. Now, I work night and day for the Scottish Hospitality Group, for hospitality in general and hot tourism in this country, and I had to close my business yesterday. Luckily, I sold it on to somebody else and protected my employees, because that was the first thing. We have seen non-domestic rates hikes in Scotland, unlike anywhere across the UK. Northern Ireland, a Sinn Féin government, and their politics stopped their rates revaluations in Northern Ireland. They put their politics aside and committed to, because they saw the devastation that was going to be put on the hospitality sector and tourism sector in Northern Ireland. In Scotland, one of our members, £111,000 rateable value, up to £675,000 payable. That is unaffordable. Now, whilst we talk about, if you cut rates one way, you've got to have an effect, as the First Minister said, on an impact on somewhere else in the economy. If we don't have surviving businesses, you're going to have no tax take whatsoever. We have launched a campaign to stop the rates hike now, at least for this year, to let the Gill report do its report, and then before the next budget, take the results of the Gill report and then implement that in the next budget. So my ask is, why can we not halt the rates, the revaluations right now, study what happens over the next few months, and then look at it before the next budget? those, and I agree with what Ross Greer just said there, that the rates relief and everything and the non-domestic rates doesn't help small businesses. Of course it is, because they pay nothing. Small businesses rates below £12,000 pay nothing. Why are they not paying anything? They should be paying into the economy, and everybody should be paying something. You do not have to be a big business to have a rateable value of over 100,000. We have members with restaurants, 75 seats in a restaurant, who have valuations of, or rates payable of 70, 75,000 a year. It's unaffordable. While other people who have big restaurants, big hotels and everything else, who have rateable values of below 12, 15,000. The rate system is broken, so it needs to be halted down before you lose everything across this economy. And my question really comes down to this. If we see the continuation of businesses closing, will the Scottish Government take the blame when there's more unemployment, more high street shops and pubs shut, and we're at a tumbleweed area?
That's directly to you then.
Well, obviously, I accept that there were businesses that will face challenges as a consequence of business rates changes that have been made. But there is also a very significant amount of public expenditure used to support businesses in managing that transition. So that's part and parcel of the commitment. Secondly, I think there would be significant kickback from small businesses around the country where we've actually made significant progress in expanding the small business base of Scotland if the small business bonus scheme that the Scottish Government put in place back in 2007 was removed, as Steve Montgomery has just suggested. So my point there is that we make choices about the areas in which we try to encourage and motivate business development through the use of our policies. And the third point I'd make is that in all the decisions that we take, we're taking a whole range of different decisions about investment in business, in supporting businesses through either skills support or rate support or investment support through Scottish Enterprise, Hands Enterprise or South of Scotland Enterprise. I saw a number of really successful ventures in the South of Scotland yesterday that are being supported by the work of South of Scotland Enterprise. So there's a whole range of different measures that are taken to support the business development climate in Scotland. And where businesses face difficulties over costs, that can often be the consequence, as the question from the Food and Drink Federation referred to, a cumulative impact of things like employers' national insurance contributions, which came out of a clear blue sky, which has had much more impact on the economy than business rates ever will have, a much more greater impact as a consequence of the decision that came from the UK government on employers' national insurance contributions, which is quite simply a tax on jobs, and it's made it more difficult for people to find employment. And my final point is that unemployment in Scotland today is sitting at a historically low level, much lower than the rest of the United Kingdom economy. Why? Because of the investments that we make in the economy.
So Malcolm, Malcolm.
This is a classic case study of the gap in rhetoric between politicians who say they understand business and actually don't. Because the reality is that there's very few politicians who have actually been in business. They've actually had to make payroll on a Friday. And you all know, those that you do that, you pay your employees before you pay yourself. And there's a breakdown here in the rhetoric between being business friendly and actually seeing this happen in real life. And the reality is that business is often seen by politicians as a golden goose. And you just keep pulling the lever, which is why I say those with the broadest shoulders are now shrugging their shoulders, saying, why bother? Why would I work an extra shift? Why would I expand my business? Why would I bring on a new employee? Because right now it's all been taken away from you. So I think the rhetoric has to stop. Scotland is underperforming. Its economy is underperforming. We all know that. You all know that. It's time for no more words. We actually need to put policies through that allow business to thrive. The economy will pay this back many, many times over. People will... This is the thing. You give people a tax break who run businesses. They don't run off and go on holiday. What do? They keep the money in the business. They reinvest it in the company. They grow their business. That is what you all do. That is what small businesses do. Very few politicians really understand that.
Okay, any other questions? Ladies down here at the front.
Thank you. Recent research by the Women's Enterprise Scotland showed that despite women being 54% of startups being women-led, only 16% then become employer-led businesses. That's a 70% attrition rate. Shouldn't surprise any of us. Only 2%, that well-versed line, 2% of venture funding goes to women-led businesses, and public funding that is focused on growth just isn't reaching women. And so that is deeply felt in communities like my community in Highlands and Islands, where a lot of the businesses that are community anchored are actually women-led. And so we're all looking to the future, and we're looking to what you are going to do that no other Scottish Government in the past has done in order to support this market failure, because this is a market failure. Scotland is facing a market failure if 70% of women-led businesses are not reaching a growth stage.
Russell?
Well, I'll be the first to mansplain from the all-male panel how we're going to fix this. I completely understand the discrepancy in numbers between women making up more than half the population and making up such a small proportion of the business community. I don't know the answer for how we encourage more women into business, but we should all be seeking to do so. And I think women entrepreneurs and women in business like yourselves have got a big role to play in doing so. And there is a problem. Clearly there's a problem. We want to maximise the potential of everyone in this country. I've got a friend who's female who owns a business in Glasgow. It's entirely owned by her. It's hugely successful, and it's in the brewing industry. And in the time that this has been growing steadily and successfully and quietly and modestly, we've seen the big boy businesses of Brewdog and Innocent Gun going under, both male-owned, and I wonder if there's some correlation between that. So I will do everything I possibly can to support women in business, and I'd be happy to speak with you to see if there's anything that you can bring forward to us for our manifesto potentially in order to maximise the role of women in growing our economy.
Anna.
I think there's a few different things. One is, I think if you look at the performance of South of Scotland Enterprise and Highland Island Enterprise, actually it overperforms if you look compared to what Scottish Enterprise does. And I think the honest answer is we're not getting bang for our buck for every pound that is put in. How do we make sure more of that is going to support businesses on the front line rather than just being payrolls of public sector bodies? And then how do you get better decision making so there is representation of women in the decisions that are made, not just the applicants into those businesses? And then there's wider challenges as well, because let's be honest, if you look at the gaps in childcare, issues that come up with caring responsibilities, despite all our talk of equality, the burden of those things still invariably falls on women. And therefore, it's often women that are having to step back and make the sacrifices to support other people. We've got to change that. So that's why we've got to maintain the 3 hours of childcare. We should do much more generous tax-free childcare too, recognising that childcare is not just from 3 to 5, but actually from 0 to 12 there is a particular challenge. And then how do you have leadership and role modelling as well, and kind of people to inspire and to help and to mentor women into business, to stay into business. And the final thing I'll say is Scotland is really good at start-up. What we're not good at is scale-up. And so often the scale-up ends up going abroad. And so how do we identify those startups? How do we put resource behind those startups? And how do we make this a scale-up nation at the same time with women at its heart?
Said Alex could come.
Sure.
Sorry.
Thank you. Look, I hope everyone on this panel wants to smash the patriarchy, but we're nowhere near doing that. So much of our society is designed around men. Take, for example, in the pandemic. If you consider the vast majority of caregivers in our NHS are female and in our care homes are female, yet the PPE face-fit masks that we were giving out to people were designed around 5'10", 12-stone men. They didn't fit and they weren't providing protection. It's just one example, but it's a really good one. So we need to do a range of things. A lot of this is about culture and changing culture. And you know, and I know, that as well in the public sector as well in the private sector, that culture begins in the boardroom. That's why I was very proud to be the vice convener of the Equalities and Human Rights Committee in the last Parliament that brought through the Gender Representation on Public Boards Act, so that we actually start to have public boards in our public sector which reflect better our society more generally, and then build business practices which work for women. That needs to happen in the private sector too. Childcare is absolutely right, and Nass is right on this as well. We're not getting it right on childcare. Lib Dems at this election want to bring forward targeted childcare specifically for women who are adrift of the labour market, who cannot make the sums add up. It is not economically viable for them to return to the startup that they left to go on mat leave because it's too expensive to keep their child in childcare. We need to go back to things like the Maclean Commission on the future of publicly funded childcare, which looked at for example, childcare vouchers, in the same way that self-directed support works if you've got a disability. But all of this comes back to culture, and we will never smash the patriarchy unless we change that culture.
Oh, Alex, I'm very tempted to go down another route there when you mentioned that gender representation on public boards, but I won't. And John, you can answer that question.
I'll move us on, Gina, just to save you some agony. It's part of the public service that I offer to you today. I greatly valued the dialogue engagement I had when I was dealing as Economy Secretary with Women's Enterprise Scotland, and I felt as part of the work that we did was, actually a lot of it went on here in relation to the Scottish Edge Fund, which has helped to trigger so many start-up opportunities within Scotland, was really valuable work, and I'm totally committed. You know my long-standing interest and support for this area of activity. I think we've made a lot of headway in terms of start-up activity, but the emphasis of government has moved on to supporting also the scale-up opportunities. So the tech scaler investments that have been made are really successful and attracting a lot of I'm visiting one of the ventures in Dundee the other week there. There's a lot of women participating in the leadership of these tech scaler ventures that are emerging. There are, of course, wider policy questions that have to be supportive, which is why we've expanded early learning and childcare significantly. It was 412 hours when we came to office. It's now 1,140 hours, but it's not enough and it's not complete. So the commitments that I'm making in the election around about completing that childcare offering, so for children from 9 months to 12 years will have a wraparound childcare support all year round, is an essential part of making it more practical and plausible for women to be able to exercise that leadership role, of which there are plenty of outstanding examples around the country, but we need to make sure that all the surrounding infrastructure works to support women who decide to take on that creative and innovative and leadership role, which is fundamental to the strength of the Scottish economy. And I want to make sure that we change that balance of entrepreneurship in Scotland so that entrepreneurship in Scotland is more representative of the population, which means a big upsurge in women's participation.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next theme very soon, should say. But if you want to answer that question quickly. Yeah, sorry.
Thanks, Gina, and thank you for the question. A couple of quick points. I'll just pick up on what Anas was saying around Scottish Enterprise in particular, because I think their underperformance and the underperformance of the government's economy directorate is very gendered, because Scottish Enterprise, as I said right at the start, is much better at providing support for existing larger businesses to expand than it is to start-ups, and that is an incredibly gendered way to approach economic support. So the first thing there is ambitious, pretty blunt targets for the share of their enterprise grants that go towards startups in particular, startups led by women, I think is absolutely essential. The next part of the puzzle is colleges, because we've lost about 150,000 college places over the last decade or so, overwhelmingly the kind of short courses that women in particular were using to gain the skills they needed to set up their own businesses. So we really need to reinvest in the college sector. It was the Greens' top priority in this round of budget negotiations, same for the Lib Dems, and between us we were able to secure that significant additional funding for colleges. But I think between the two of those, Scottish Enterprise, fixing the issues at Scottish Enterprise and college funding, that would go a long way towards addressing the really gendered way in which we are failing to support startups in particular. It's that risk-averse approach that we see from SE, but also from the National Investment Bank, I think.
Okay, Malcolm. Yeah.
Just very quickly, I mean, the economy is therefore losing out in a lot of value that could be added by innovative and creative women. And so the question is, how do we incentivise that cohort to actually take up and go the extra mile on this? And it's childcare. I'm sure it's a big part of it. And can we just rearrange that to make it worthwhile? How many women that I hear saying they go to work and pay it all away? That's wrong, so we just fix that. I think that's just a problem that should be fixed by a matter of incentive.
Okay, let's move on to the second theme, which is Scotland's potential on the world stage. Which, of course, we know we will be on with the World Cup later this year. But in business terms, how do we turn the current investment at jobs that are coming into Scotland and also get, as I think John Spinney mentioned, more goods and services leaving Scotland to global destinations? How do you turn brand Scotland into brand invest in Scotland? Ross, we'll start with you.
Thanks very much. I think the first thing we should do is not all of us, some of us don't do this. The first thing I would ask some of my colleagues to do is to stop denigrating the Scottish Government's network of offices abroad, because they have been incredibly successful at supporting businesses to export from here into particular markets. But there's so much more we could do with them. I'm always frustrated because the political debate around these offices, which are primarily to support trade, has been about whether they're proto-embassies for our separatist movement, ignoring the fact that it was John Major that set up the international network of Scottish offices even before we had a Scottish Parliament and government. So I would want to see more of these. These are relatively low-cost offices that I think we get a huge amount of value from, but I would also like them to be more fleet of foot. Speaking in the last few weeks to folk from the whisky industry in particular about the fact that, sadly, the United States is now a really high-risk market for us, and food and drink, whisky most obviously, is really overexposed to those risks. We had a situation in Canada where American alcohol came off the shelves pretty much overnight. There wasn't an immediate replacement for that. The Scottish Government had an office in Ottawa, but I don't think was fleet of foot enough to be able to support our whisky exporters to make sure that they were filling that gap. Because Canada at the moment is a relatively small, I think our 12th biggest whisky export market, so those offices have an absolutely essential role to play. The most expensive of them, I think, is only £500,000 a year for the government to run. I think we get a lot of value out of them, but we've only got a handful of them. And we need to see them grow. We need to see more of them. I was proud that when we were in government, we championed opening the office in Copenhagen. I think having more of a presence in Central and Eastern Europe would be essential for that as well. I'm aware of situations where, because of the totally disjointed way this works in government, where officials from one particular department of the government cold called Netflix, and Screen Scotland, our national film and television agency, didn't know anything about it because it was such a siloed approach within government. So we need these offices, but we also need to recognise that there are areas of government that have a depth of specialist knowledge. I think Screen Scotland is a great example because it's led by folk who've come from industry to run it. We need to make sure that they're the ones who are allowed to take the lead on building these kind of relationships that are particularly focused on export. Okay. Foreign direct investment side of it is where I'm a bit more concerned, if I'm being completely honest. I think the reasons why we do so well for FDI should be celebrated, highly educated population, etc. But because we've been so focused on that, I think, as I said at the start, we've ended up with an economy where far too great a share is owned by companies that are headquartered outside of Scotland, and we therefore lose a lot of the wealth generated as a result.
Russell, you would shut down those offices, wouldn't you? You're not a fan.
No, what we would do is continue exporting to as many countries as we possibly can. But what we have to do is ensure that the companies in Scotland are healthy in order to be able to export in the first place. And right now, it's the same recurring themes that I opened with. Sky-high income tax detracting from people wanting to come here to work. A rate system that's completely broken. All the other big-ticket issues around planning, around the skills gap, failing the business community in Scotland. We need to get that right in order to get our export market correct. And that's what we would focus on. And I would back every single Scottish business to get out there and sell to the world, and especially our world-leading food and drink produce.
John?
I think it's absolutely vital that Scotland is exporting and making sure that our products get to all parts of the world that they can get to, that government is active in trying to remove the obstacles. At some not inconsiderable political risk, I decided to try to secure a deal that would get whisky tariffs lifted by the President of the United States, which is having a detrimental effect on the food and drinks, the whisky sector, the food and drink sector, the agricultural sector in Scotland. We haven't got to an agreement on that, although I remain optimistic that we can still make a compelling case for the removal of tariffs which are damaging to Scottish industry and also to economic interests in the United States. So that's an example, a concrete example of the First Minister getting up and getting on with sorting out issues that need to be sorted out. And of course, sometimes when I do that, I get some criticism for doing it as well, but I'm not going to make any apology for trying to fix issues on behalf of industry within Scotland. I think we've got to be very prepared to engage in promotional activities overseas. So what Ross has said about the network of Scottish Government offices is absolutely right. We were represented at the Japan Expo, which is a strategically significant market for Scotland in life sciences and gaming and renewable energy. And I think there are some very significant investment opportunities coming out of that. The Global Investment Summit that took place in Edinburgh is attracting huge amounts of interest in key sectors in life sciences and renewables especially. and financial services. And I think that active promotion of investment opportunities is crucial and has been something that I've certainly concentrated on in all of my ministerial life. And it's crucial that we construct a Team Scotland approach about landing all of these investments and landing these opportunities, because when we do that, and we've demonstrated this on countless occasions, we can attract very significant investment into Scotland, which generates economic wealth and economic value for the Scottish economy. And one last comment, the point about that Russell made about people not coming to Scotland because of tax, there's actually been net migration into Scotland of taxpayers, which is demonstrated by the recent data that's come out. So these issues are issues that the public are voting with their feet and coming to Scotland as a consequence.
Can I ask Malcolm about these offices? Because we know that you're not particularly keen on quangos. You've said you'd abolish the lot. But what about these offices abroad? Do you think you were obviously in the Department of Business? You must have seen a benefit or not?
So I was very privileged to be the Export Minister for 18 months in the Department of Business and Trade, and I saw all this firsthand, just how important exporting is. Scotland, food and drink is our exemplar, okay? We've got 8% of the population and 20% of UK exports. But underneath that stat, we're actually underperforming in other areas in export. We need to do better. I mean, for example, in England, in the SME territory, 10% of SMEs are exporting, whereas in Scotland there's only 6%. And that needs to go up, because what we learn is when we look at businesses, SMEs that export, we find that they have higher growth, higher margins, and they pay higher wages. So these are terrific companies we've got to grow. We've got to have more of it. And my question would be, if we want to encourage the SMEs to do that, are we better off giving money to a bunch of offices, or are we better off giving a bunch of money to you guys who actually run them and incentivise you to grow your business? And to me, I think the best bang for taxpayers' money buck is to incentivise business owners to get out and chase deals around the world. And of course, we've now got these very significant trade deals going on that I was involved with, the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is 14 countries around the world. The last time I looked at the map, Britain wasn't anywhere near the Pacific Ocean. We've got into this incredible deal, which is 15% of GDP. We can now sell internationally. We're cutting tariffs right down to very low levels, and in fact, most of them at zero. And that's big, big opportunities for exporters. And I remember going to see one of our export champions, not well-known company particularly, but in Glasgow, called AAC Clyde Space. And space is now a new industry. It's only really about 10 years old. They're the biggest manufacturer of satellites, commercial and defence satellites in the world. They employ 200 people. Not many people have heard of them, but they're now exploiting these trade deals. The India trade deal coming in, they've now got international markets to go to. My challenge is that I believe that we grow business by incentivising people. I'd rather have people incentivised rather than having a whole bunch of offices open for people to go for cocktail parties.
Anna, has Malcolm just given an argument there for you if you were to win this election, just to leave everything to the Scotland office to get on with?
Look, you have to have, of course, a value for money test for everything you do with public spending, and of course that's what we would do. But we want Scotland to have a footprint right across the globe, because the reality is we have to tap into the soft power of Scotland. And that soft power of Scotland can be seen right across the globe. People know we are great people. They know we have great landscapes. They know we have great produce, but we need everyone to know that this is a great place to do business. And so how do you create those conditions to make it a good place to do business? Without private sector investment and without foreign direct investment, none of us can achieve the objectives we want to deliver the growth we need in this country and then the social change that comes after that. So how do we do genuine partnership? Where's the trade that happens from the regions within Scotland to the regions in other parts of the UK? I want to have a First Minister that leads those trade missions to get deals done within the UK. I want us to have that better relationship with the European Union. I also want us to tap into our diaspora communities. So all those Scots that have created a footprint right across the globe, particularly in North America, how are we tapping into those relationships for maximum economic benefit? And then it works the other way too. All the diaspora communities from those other nations around the globe that are now home in Scotland and helping grow Scotland, how do we tap into their relationships to make sure we have better trade, for example, in India, the wider South Asia, and in other parts of the world too? That's a more coordinated way of how I think we need to run government. And that's, for me, why we have to have an economics directorate that sits in the office of the First Minister, not a separate branch. And it has to be front and centre of every single thing the government does and every decision it makes to make sure we're attracting investment here in Scotland.
Okay, Alex.
Well, any kind of trade is built on trust. It's built on relationships and stability and confidence. And yes, I agree with a lot of what's been said about export. But in terms of inward investment and attracting inward investment to Scotland, Scotland just isn't seen as a safe place to do business in a lot of sectors right now. I'll give you an example as house building. Now, if you think about big portable capital, for whether that's pension funds that are investing in big housing developments. Scotland is not regarded as a safe place to build houses right now. Why is that? Because when the SNP and Green government brought in a rent freeze, they did it retrospectively. It's the first piece of retrospective legislation the Scottish Parliament has ever passed. It applied to existing tenancies. Immediately, that starved off £3.4 billion worth of shovel-ready private sector build-to-rent investment. That money doesn't need to be spent in Scotland. If you're going to build a housing development, you can build it in Manchester just as fast as you want to build it in Glasgow. We need to stabilise that confidence and bring it back because it's absolutely vital. The other thing I'll say is this, in terms of our relationship with the world stage or our forays into the world stage, our biggest trading partner after England is the European Union. Liberal Democrats passionately believe that we need to unpick the damage caused by Brexit. We need to urgently restore and build bridges with that trading market, that trading partner. We do that several ways. We do that with a bespoke customs union. So it makes it easier for you to sell your products into the European Union and for you to get your supply side needs met by partners on the European Union as well. We want to make it easier for young people to live and work, which will answer some of the skills deficit that you're facing, particularly in agriculture, particularly in hospitality, with a bespoke, again, a youth mobility scheme, as the Lib Dems have identified. But we can't expect Scotland to flourish on the world stage if people do not have confidence that we are a safe place to do business.
Okay, thanks. Obviously, a lot of those issues reserved to Westminster. I'm very conscious of the time. We're already over when we were supposed to finish, but we started late. So if anybody wants to ask another question, I'll happily take one. This lady here with the glasses on.
I want to talk about the skills shortage, if I can. As you can tell from my accent, I'm an outlander. Came from down south, and I brought 2 graduates and 1 potential. My daughter has really struggled to find a job up here. She graduated with a first, and she's now looking at going down south again. How are you? 16% of under 25s are unemployed. How are you sorting that out, and can you give me some real specific strategies rather than a political answer?
John, do you want to go first?
I'm sorry that your daughter's finding it challenging to find work, and what we do with the different initiatives that we have in place through the enterprise agencies is try to work to support business to create new employment opportunities. In the course of I'm confessing to Anna Sauer, my sense of time is, it was just last week actually, I was in or the week before last, I was in the Scottish borders and the south of Scotland, where we were announcing over 2,000 new jobs in Ryanair, in Batty Storage in Dumfries, and in Centre Parks in the borders, new employment creation, and we are working through new employment creation in the renewables industry, in the life sciences sector, financial services sector as well. So there is a constant round of new employment creation that we are encouraging and motivating in our dialogue with companies. So that's about the creation of employment opportunities. In terms of skills development, as colleagues have talked about, we have just increased support for the college sector. We have a record number of Scottish students going to university to acquire the skills to enable them to participate in the labour market. We've got a rising number of graduate apprenticeships, which we see as a very relevant and applicable route to get into employment with the skills that individuals can deploy. And we're just taking forward legislative change to make sure that can be further enhanced as a consequence of the engagement with the university sector to expand graduate apprentices, which I think is one of the most reliable and dependable ways of getting younger people into the employment market. So those are just some of the steps that we take, both in terms of skills reform, but also in terms of the support to investment within the economy to create new rounds of jobs. And so one last point, Scotland has been the most successful part of the United Kingdom in attracting foreign direct investment, apart from London and the South East, for everyone in the last 10 years. So the point that Alec Cole-Hamilton made about an unsafe place for investment, I totally... Well, we changed the housing legislation. I changed the housing legislation, Alex, to make it possible for us to land private investment, and we're now landing that private investment. So part of this election campaign is talking about the realities of what's going on in Scotland, not the things that suit a political narrative.
Alex, do you want to come in?
Yeah, well, firstly, I'm really sorry to hear about your daughter. I hope that she finds a job that she loves very soon. But it would be even worse if she was a newly qualified teacher. Only 1 in 9 newly qualified teachers are in a permanent job right now. The rest are on supply or leaving the profession altogether. And this is because we are not connecting our skills throughput with the jobs available in our community. And where is that worse, above all, in any sector, is in social care right now. We just cannot fill social care vacancies. As a result, care homes are closing. People are not getting the care they need. And it leads to the biggest problem in this election right now. And it has a massive economic impact. And that is this. On any given night in Scotland, there are 2,000 Scots stuck in our hospitals, well enough to go home, but too frail to do so, without a care package to receive them to their own home or a care bed in a local care home because of that deficiency of care. That, in turn, leads to the cancellation of elective surgical procedures so that you've got those 800,000 Scots waiting for an operation, many of whom are economically inactive as a result of it. It leads to the fact you're waiting 24 hours in a corridor in A&E because you can't be admitted to the main hospital, and all of those ambulances stacking up outside, unable to discharge their patients. It's not a deficiency of care in our hospitals. It's because we can't recruit people into the social care sector. It costs half as much money to keep somebody in a care home as it does in hospital, and quarter as much to keep them in their own home. All told, this is costing the NHS £1.3 million a day. That is failure demand, if ever there was some.
Okay, Ross.
I mean, at the very highest level, going back to what I said at the start, we would scrap the National Strategy for Economic Transformation and replace it with one that's actually strategic and transformative by identifying the specific sectors where government support, sectors and business models, where government support would make the biggest difference. But you're asking for more specifics than the kind of high-level abstracts. I mentioned earlier, people here will not be surprised. I'm not a big fan of tax breaks, but I do think university spin-out companies in particular need more of that support, because we're just losing far too many businesses that go on to be high-value big employers, because after a couple of years they move to that arc between Oxford and Cambridge. And the last specific I'll give is an example of a business that I have been supporting. At Hunterston, we have the old coal terminal at Hunterston Port. And a company wanted to come in there, ex-LCC, and set up a factory to manufacture undersea cables. They could not find a route, they couldn't find an open door in government, and had to come to me. Now, my party was in government at the time, so I was able to then make those connections. I've been supporting that business to build a relationship with Ayrshire College. We've had the first 12 apprentices already go through that scheme. They've set up their own academy. We're looking at 100, 150 people a year who are going to be coming into employment there, because we're going to be manufacturing a product that we know has a long-term future. Undersea cables, obvious for offshore wind energy in particular, but lots of other uses. Those are really high-quality manufacturing jobs, and it's the perfect example of the just transition, because it's on the former coal terminal site. But they could not find the right door in government to do that. So one of our priorities needs to be, we talk about this no wrong door approach. That's not a reality at the moment. Government economic support is far too siloed. So making sure that it's far easier for businesses who want to start, or businesses who want to come into Scotland and invest, to find the simple way to do that. It shouldn't have taken me as the local MSP to get them connected with the right Scottish enterprise officials to do it.
Okay, Anna, sorry.
So look, this election's about Scotland's future, and the very definition of Scotland's future is our young people. And if you look at the stats, the most recent stats that I saw, in the rest of the UK, around 1 in 8 young people aren't in education, training or employment. In Scotland, that's 1 in 6. And that's not acceptable, because that is lost opportunity and not a chance for a community to thrive, not just an individual. So there's a few different things we have to do. First, we should have a job guarantee scheme for our young people, which is a partnership between government, the private sector and the third sector, so we can make sure every young person gets a chance. We've got to change our skills system, so it's right that we protect free university tuition, but it can't come at the expense of the best route for most working class kids, which is either an apprenticeship or a college place. And we would create 9,000 new apprenticeships in the key growth sectors in our country around AI, around defence and around life sciences. That's the future lifeblood. But we have to go further than that. It's all very well and good doing a jobs guarantee scheme, but there has to be proper jobs in our economy as well. And we can create those new jobs by building the homes our country needs. That's 125,000 new homes in the next Parliament, and the construction jobs that go alongside that. It's ending the block on clean nuclear energy so we can create 5,000 new jobs here in Scotland. And again, that's opportunities for amazing young people. And earlier on, we had the conversation about business rates. But I think the bit that was missing from the conversation about business rates is because people often talk about business rates and the impact it has on businesses. But think about the impact it has on communities, on high streets, on town centres and city centres. Our retail and hospitality units are the lifeblood of these communities. And if they collapse, local jobs are not there. So how do you abolish our unfair business rate system and have a new system that's rigged in favour of the high streets rather than in favour of the online giants? Okay. How do you make sure it drives footfall so there's incentives for local authorities to get footfall into these places rather than just stifling these businesses when they are the lifeblood of so many communities?
Thank you. Russell.
Well, I do also hope your daughter finds something here, because far too many young people are leaving and far too many young people are being completely left behind. John Swinney said a moment ago that he's increasing college funding. It's been cut by 20% under the SNP government. And you asked for a specific example of a policy that we have that would address this problem, and that's one in which we've identified huge numbers of young people who just switch off, drop out of school and don't want to know. They're leaving school without basic literacy, basic numeracy, and at best they'll spend a life in benefits. At worst, they'll end up on a life of crime. And so what we are saying is those kids should be given the opportunity, with the support of their parents, to enter a form of hybrid education and training. There was a very successful model of this conducted by a businessman called Jim McCall. It worked brilliantly. Just about everyone that took part in that, young men mostly, aged 14, 15, who otherwise would have dropped out the system, ended up flourishing and getting an occupation that gave them a life of opportunity and prosperity. So there's a good example of what we can do. Okay. And another very quick thing that hasn't been mentioned thus far, not even by John Swinney, is the Union, Scotland's place in the United Kingdom. You're not going to improve the life chances of the young people of Scotland by separating Scotland from the rest of the UK.
Malcolm.
Well, again, I'm very sorry to hear about your daughter, because I remember graduating 40 years ago and out of Scottish University, and we all went off and got good jobs. But then I was, at that point, 10% of Scottish school leavers got free education at 8, what were then 8 universities. Now we are pushing towards 50% of kids at university, and it's a great aspiration, but is that the right, are we producing perhaps too many graduates? Question mark. And you know, every bartender has a degree. Should we actually be thinking more about having more like 50% going through colleges, etc.? And should we be actually thinking about pathways and early interventions? You know, we talk in our manifesto about the fact in Scotland we've got 10 really high-class sectors in Scotland. We're real centres of excellence, and they cover the whole of the country. And a lot of them need technical skills. And can we get interventions at an earlier age in school, where pathways are created for people, allowing the brightest, the academics, of course, to go to university, but allowing a good cohort of people to come through with technical skills into jobs that will not be taken away by AI. Being a high-quality welder will not be taken away by AI. Being a high-quality chef will not be taken away by AI. And there'll be well-paid jobs in those industries. So can we find out, do we need to rebalance? I think the answer is we do need to rebalance and particularly look at the college sector.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nearly 5:30. We're well over time. The candidates were all supposed to get a minute each to sum up, but I'm not going to let them do that now. Instead, I'm going to say one word, try and do it.
I think we're happy to stay for an extra 6 minutes.
An extra 6, I don't know if the audience is, though. But, one thing that you've heard today from the people in this audience, the questions that they've asked, that you're going to take away and act on in the next Parliament. Russell.
Aspiration.
Alex.
One word.
One word.
Change.
Change.
Yeah.
Oh, Anas, you're stuffed. You're stuffed. John.
Hope.
Hope. Malcolm.
Incentive.
Ross.
Focus.
Anas.
Partnership.
There we go. Thank you. See, everybody's phones are going off now. It's time to bring this to a close. Thank you very much for you all coming along today, and thank you very much to our panellists for giving their time to this rather unique Hustings. I think the only one that will focus specifically on the questions that business wanted to ask, and this had you all here together. I think everybody in the audience will just hope that that partnership, that hope, that change, that aspiration will come to fruition in some form or other after May the 7th. So give us a round of applause for our panellists, and thank you very much. And there's drinks in the lobby.
For Gina Davis.
No.